right, without further ado, Cheryl.
Thank you, Ray. I'm glad to be here with you all, and I would like to know who's here. So maybe we'll go around and have you just tell me your name and your role at the school and what the school you're at. That'd be really helpful. And then I'm assuming you all don't know each other either, so get a sense of that. Would you start?
I would love to start. I'm not affiliated with the school, however. I'm a coordinator of youth ministry at St. Augustine in Howell, and I coordinate young adult ministry for 8 parishes in Livingston County.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is Shannon.
Hi, Shanna.
I too am a youth minister at St. Rita Parish, and I'm Beth Ann Vernon.
I'm Janie Atlanta, and I'm the assistant principal at Father Gabriel Richard High School.
I'm Lauren Post. I am one of the counselors at Father Gabriel Richard High School.
Doug Moore, principal at Lansing Catholic.
I'm Amber Whiting. I teach middle school English at Resurrection Lakeland. I'm Jill Jacobs. I'm the resource teacher at Resurrection School.
Christine Radio, principal at Holy Spirit.
I'm Roseanne Jobway. I'm the principal at St. John the Evangelist in Fenton. Janine Kenny, principal at St. Patrick in Martin.
Kitty Perkins, assistant principal at St. Hannah Atkin, principal at Sacred Heart in Hudson. Karen Marshall, assistant principal at St. Gerard. Shelby Beaton, principal at St. Gerard.
Mark Lester, counseling, St. Gerard.
Heather Emmett, counseling intern, St. Gerard.
Jerry Thomas, middle school administrator at St. Francis in Indiana.
Okay.
Danny Miller, principal at St. Mary of Charlotte. Laura Heagle, principal at St. Paul in Wausau. Stephanie Sandel, middle school at St. Paul in Wausau.
Okay.
Sarah Salo, I'm the Director of Religious Education for St. Mary Pinckney, and I'm also the Youth Coordinator for the parishes.
Okay.
Amanda Garrett, I'm a school counselor and junior at Legal University in Jackson.
Okay.
Tim DeLauro, principal at St. Thomas the Apostle in Ann Arbor.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to.
Teresa Edwards, Director of Curriculum for the Diocese.
And Peter?
I'm Peter Fromm. I'm with Faith Catholic in the IT technical support.
Okay. Okay. Did we miss anybody? So I would like today to be a dialogue. So if you have something to add, a question, raise your hand. I'm here to meet your needs, and I think that one of the things that we can do through doing that is really tapping into your knowledge and wisdom. You all work with young people every day and have lots of knowledge about what works with kids, obviously, for the good work you're doing. So I work for the diocese very part-time as the Victim Assistance Coordinator. And then my full-time work is at Michigan State University. I'm a faculty in the School of Social Work, and I teach in a couple areas. One area is administrative and organizational leadership, because before I was at the school, I worked in leading human service organizations. And the other area that I teach is in the area of child welfare and child trauma, and I'm working on some national projects around supporting child welfare workers, and another project around preparing social work students to work with young people who've experienced trauma. So you're going to find that I start there, because I kind of see that as the etiology of all of this, is the things that folks have experienced: suicide, depression, anxiety, and all of the behavioral things that may or may not have labels that you see and are challenged with in the schools usually have at their base some kind of a trauma or loss. And so I'm going to share with you that lens, because it's a bit of a different lens, and it's emerging in our profession as helpers, and it's really coming into school systems now. And there are school systems that are working to be trauma informed. So I have a secondary agenda based upon my work, is that you all know what it is to be a trauma-informed teacher, youth minister, principal, counselor, and what a trauma-informed school might look like. So we will cover suicide, but that will be one part of it, because I really want to talk about this broader context, because it is, I think, where you will get at being able to understand the things that will prevent the behavioral challenges that you see. So we're going to take a couple breaks too, just so that you can get up and move around. The last I heard about adult learning is that content should be at about 6 to 7 minutes, because that's about what keeps our attention span. And I teach online as well as in class, and that's what the most recent neuroscience says. So when we prepare bits of information to share with students, we're recording our lectures are 7 minutes or less. And then you need to do something that's active. So I understand that. I'm still going to be talking at you most of the time, but you raise your hand, we can talk, we'll stop and pause, we're going to get up and move around and take a couple breaks as well. So with that, what I'd like to, the framework that I'm going to talk to you about is really one of understanding both risk and protective factors. So this framework, much of the research around behavior and mental health across the lifespan is identifying what puts someone at risk, and on the counter, what is protective. So if we're going to talk about the things that put folks at risk, we're going to have to start by thinking about, I want to be strength-based, and I want to start with protective factors and thinking about the things that, despite exposure to risks that could cause mental health issues, that are protective for kids. Partially because when we think about this, what you do in your schools is creating the protective space, the safe space for kids. So if you would take out the first handout, the Child and Youth Resilience Measure. Please do write on this. If you decide you wanted to use this for any reason, you can, it's all something you could Google and download. So what I want you to do is I'd like each of you to complete this, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about your middle school to high school years, okay? Think about a time that was the hardest for you, okay? And I want you to go back and be the young person you were then. And I'd like you to complete this in just identifying what were where you would have been then around what your protective factors were, because this is this is a list of resilience factors. So take a minute and fill that out based upon who you were then. Most everybody's done. So let me talk a little bit about this risk and protective factors framework, and then we'll come back to that. The second handout you have is comes from the federal government. It's the risk and protective factors for mental, emotional, and behavioral disorders across the lifespan. And there's a couple things. One thing is this is probably best in color because there's some color coding to it. So one thing you might do is find this online and look at it in color. So basically what we see is that there are a list of, on the left-hand column, risk factors, and this is by age group. So let's look at middle childhood. So the risk factors are down the left, and they're presented to you on an individual, family, and school and community level, okay? So you can see that risk factors are both things that might be intrinsic or inside of a young person, but they're also things in the environment. So when you look at these areas, with the color coding, it actually will link the risk factor to the disorder. So you can see up in the top right-hand corner, it lists depression, anxiety, substance abuse, schizophrenia, and conduct disorders, which are, conduct disorders are disorders where kids act out. Their conduct is usually, it's kids that get involved in the juvenile justice system and are breaking the law, that kind of thing. So the specific risk factors are tied to those. Also, the list of protective factors is tied to those. So if we're gonna start today by talking about prevention. The way you prevent suicide and mental health issues is to assure that you have protective factors covered in your environment. So if you look in middle childhood on the individual level, in early childhood, the protective factors are the things that a child learns usually through their family and attachment with caregivers. So it's being attached to caregivers in their home, where you learn to manage, where they learn to self-regulate, manage distress, develop social skills, basic communication and language skills. If you go down then on the individual level to middle childhood, you'll see that it's mastery of academic skills, following rules for behavior at home and school, the ability to make friends and good peer relations. That's on the individual level. When you look at, on the individual level in adolescence, it's physical development, academic achievement, self-esteem, ability to manage emotions is what we mean by emotional self-regulation, coping skills, problem-solving skills. And on the individual level for high schoolers, and this starts really in middle school too, engagement and connections in 2 or more of the following contexts serves to be a protective factor. And that's school with peers, in athletics, employment, religion, and culture. So those are the protective factors on an individual level. You can see too, when you look at that family level, there's a number of things that you may do within your school system to support families, but go down to the school and community level, and you can see for early childhood, we're talking about access to early learning, kinds of vision, hearing, the screening things that happen. Those are the community-based things. And how do we know these are protective factors? This is the big research that happens. This is the summary of research around what helps kids thrive, what prevents the other issues. So what we know in early childhood, access to preschool and early childhood intervention is a significant preventive measure for behavioral issues later in life. And it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? If a family and a child have access to other resources in the community, early Head Start has been proven to be a really significant, have a really significant impact on mental health issues later in life and on family issues, especially for kids that are living in poverty or have a lack of access to other resources. It's a connector, okay? So when we talk about protective factors on the school level, we're talking about healthy peer groups, school engagement, positive teacher expectations, classroom management, positive partnering between the school and the family, policies and practices that reduce bullying, making that a focus of what you do in school. It's also, I think that part of that focus is also assuring that young people have the skills to address bullying when they see that, right? And having high academic standards. When you go into high school, you can see that this is as high schoolers are going out into the bigger world, having mentors and supports for development of skills and interests. Mentoring is one of the largest protective factors for kids. And there's a lot of research within mentoring that looks at, of course, programs like Big Brothers, Big Sisters that make matches between kids and adults that are interested. The other thing, kinds of mentoring programs that are really have been proven to be even more effective than programs like that are mentoring programs that support naturally occurring mentoring relationships. So recognizing that a youth may have a connection with an adult, and the mentoring program works to support that pre-existing relationship and connection. So whether it's a neighbor or another member of the church community, a coach or someone involved in school, it's supporting the mentoring relationship with some structure that way. You can see too that positive norms are a big part of protection and clear expectations for behavior, physical and psychological safety. So those are the pieces that you put, I would guess if whether it's a youth ministry program or in a school, you're working to impact all of those things because those are the things that kids need to be safe and to be protected. those are what balances the risk factor. So this whole risk protective factor framework is recognizing that we counter the risks that kids experience with creating protective factors. Anything else you notice on this list? So this slide is simply a summary of those factors from this handout. So let's talk about what the definition of resilience is. So resilience, at one point we talked about resilience in a young person as being their ability to bounce back. And the folks that really study resilience see it as much more than that. It's about learning and in developing the ability to cope. And much of resilience comes from experiencing adversity. You experience something bad and you come out on the other side of it, having grown. So resilience is adapting in the face of adversity. It includes trauma, other kinds of losses, tragedies, anything that causes stress. So stress, exposure to stress builds resilience. There's concerns that kids that are protected from stress in their environment don't develop the skills they need to manage the stress that is our daily life, right? So resilience comes from that adaptation. People are naturally resilient. One thing I know, for many years, prior to being at MSU, I was the director of the children's home at St. Vincent's here in town, and I've also worked as a therapist in the mental health system for a number of years before that. And what I know is to be true is that people are naturally resilient. As humans, we are. It's a part of our survival as a species, right? Is the ability to adapt and to grow. And that healing happens, for helpers, sometimes what we're doing is we're promoting what's already within someone to help them heal. It's not that there's not a secret answer book that therapists and counselors get that fixes things. It's really enabling what someone has internally. Very much like education, right? How you teach. You look at building on what a young person has internally. So resilience isn't an internal trait. However, internal traits can affect resilience, right? Your ability, some of us have our temperament, those kinds of things definitely impact that. So it's not a trait, it's a combination of our experience, behaviors, which is really the things we've learned that work for us, the thoughts that we have that work versus thoughts that don't work, and how our behaviors and thoughts come together and impact our behavior, which is what we mean by actions. So it's learned and it's experiential. So I had you all start with this resilience measure because I wanted to be sure that we reviewed the kinds of things that contribute to resilience. I've been training and teaching about trauma for a number of years, and something I learned about teaching about when bad things happen to kids is that we really have to focus on resilience too, or people just walk out thinking, oh my gosh, everything is a mess. And really, the message isn't that. The message is we want to understand the bad things that happen because they impact behavior, but that we also need to see and give kids experiences that let them be resilient. So how you respond when a young person is in crisis in your school or youth ministry program is going to be a factor in their resilience and how they bounce back. One of the great things about programs and opportunities to learn like you have today is that we know that people that aren't afraid of what kids might present to us if they've experienced bad things or if they're suicidal or they're hurting themselves, how you respond makes a big difference. And if you are fearful and have an alarmed reaction, you may not say that. It's so much of our communication is just body language. That really is something that a young person will read. how they choose the adults that they trust and will confide in is so much about your ability to be present for them and to be present in a way that demonstrates that you have some confidence. I work with social work students that are learning to be therapists, and their biggest challenge is how do they sit with their client the first time and get outside of how they feel about that and tune into what the other person is feeling and really be empathic. So I had a student, she was so anxious about a first session with a young person, and I asked her how it went, and all she could talk about is how she felt. Well, I was so anxious, and then I did this, and I did that, like, how did he do? Oh, so remembering that if you're an educator and you're successful and you know how to connect with kids, you have the relationship skills to respond in a crisis and to respond in a way for kids. And my hope is that if you feel anxious and fearful about what a kid might share with you in school or in your youth ministry program, that you have a bit more confidence about that when we finish our talk today, so that you have the confidence to be able to be open and listen to that. There's research that shows that people who are suicidal that go to mental health professionals, that often they don't re-engage and they don't engage, and they kind of test the waters, and they often get a sense that that person isn't ready to hear what I have to say, and they back off, they shut down, and they don't share. And being able to just say how you feel is a really important piece in being able to ask for help and get help when you need it. The other thing that they did a study of social workers who were working with and engaging with people that were suicidal, and the social workers that if a person was suicidal and engaged and came back, they were really looking at, after the first crisis session, did they come back again? When they came back, the social workers took credit for it. If they didn't come back, they put it on that client as, well, they weren't ready, or this symptom was there, or that was there. And part of the woman that's done this research is looking at, a lot of it is about that preparedness for the first engagement, and all of your communication, not just what you say, but your comfort at hearing those kinds of things. Does that make sense, Joe? Yeah. So when you did this resilience inventory, anything you noticed as your adolescent, pre-adolescent self? Yeah, Kristen.
What I noticed is how easy it is. With my plan, I'm going to be 45 years old this year. And one thing I noticed was I could recall in an instant those areas where I felt isolated and alone, and those areas that were like my strengths. It didn't take me time at all. It's like, so that many years later, like 30-some years later, it's still right there.
So I'm going to repeat that in case you couldn't hear it. So it's that going back, correct me if I'm wrong, it was easy to put yourself in that spot and to know the areas where you felt isolated and alone, and the areas that were strengths for you, the areas that were things that were helpful for you.
I did teach 7th and 8th grade, so part of it's probably that connection I keep with.
Okay, so Kristen also recognizes that teaching 7th and 8th grade keeps her connected with her 7th and 8th grade self. Right.